The wind does not howl. It hunts. It creeps along the frozen ground like a living thing, slipping between trees, clawing at stone, searching for weakness. In the far north, winter is not a season, it is a sentence. A long, merciless judgment passed by the sky itself. The air burns the lungs. The snow swallows sound. And the darkness presses in like a heavy hand over the eyes. This is the Arctic night. A night so long, so absolute, that even time seems to freeze within it. And yet, more than 1,000 years ago, people slept here. Not just survived. Not just endured. They slept. While the world outside became a frozen grave, the Vikings closed their eyes and dreamed.
I'll keep it going.
This is where our story begins. Long before electricity, before insulation, before central heating, before even glass windows, Viking families lived at the edge of the inhabitable world. Their villages were carved into landscapes where the sun vanished for weeks, sometimes months. Temperatures plunged far below anything most humans today would consider survivable. The sea became iron. The land became stone. And the night swallowed everything. But still, in longhouses built of wood, turf, and earth, entire families lay down side by side and surrendered to sleep. How? How did they close their eyes when wolves howled beyond the walls?
Stay calm, the fire
How did
will
infants
guide
survive
us.
when breath itself could freeze? How did old men wake up when their joints had turned stiff as frozen rope? How did anyone wake up at all? To understand this, we must first understand the fear. Because the Arctic night was not just cold. It was danger. It was isolation. It was the quiet certainty that if the fire died, if the roof failed, if the wind found a crack, there would be no second chance. Every winter, the north became a battlefield. And sleep was the most dangerous surrender of all. Imagine lying down on a bed made of straw and animal skins. No mattress. No blankets from a store. Only what you hunted. Only what you cured. Only what you could afford to lose. Your breath hangs in the air like pale smoke. Your fingers ache even when wrapped. The walls whisper as the wind scrapes them. The roof creaks under the weight of snow. And somewhere beyond the door, something moves. The Vikings did not romanticize winter. They feared it. They respected it. They prepared for it as if preparing for war. Because they knew one truth that modern people have forgotten. In the Arctic night, comfort is not a luxury. It is survival. The longhouse was not just a home. It was a shield. From the outside, a Viking longhouse looked low and almost buried, as if the earth itself had swallowed it. That was no accident. The walls were thick, sometimes more than a meter, built from layers of wood, stone, sod, and packed soil. Not for beauty. Not for pride. But to trap heat the way a cave traps warmth deep underground. Inside, there were no private rooms. No corridors. No separate spaces. Everyone slept together. Warriors. Wives. Children. Elders. Even animals, sometimes. Not because they lacked space, but because they understood something primal. Bodies are heat. In the darkness of winter, closeness was life. When night fell, and in winter, night never truly left, the fire in the center of the longhouse became the heart of the world. It burned day and night. If it went out, everything ended. So someone always watched it. Always fed it. Always guarded it. Even when others slept. The fire did more than warm the room. It dried the air. It kept moisture away. It kept death from creeping in silently through frost and mold. Smoke curled up through holes in the roof, staining the beams black, sealing them, protecting them. The ceiling became a shield. The walls became armor. The house became a living thing, breathing heat into frozen space. And when the fire finally burned low for the night, when the last embers glowed red like dying eyes, the Vikings lay down. Not on soft beds. Not on pillows. On layers of straw, reeds, and furs. Reindeer. Bear. Seal. Whatever they had hunted, they slept upon. Above them, more skins. Heavy. Dense. Smelling of smoke and animal oil. Each layer trapping warmth, each layer holding back the cold. Children were placed in the middle. Elders near the fire. The strongest on the outside, closest to the walls where the cold crept in. Sleep was arranged like a battle formation. Because winter did not attack once. It attacked all night. Outside, the world was silent. Snow absorbed sound. Trees stood frozen. Rivers slept under ice. The sky glowed faintly with pale auroras, like ghosts moving across a black ceiling. And in that frozen stillness, the longhouse waited. Inside, breath rose and fell. Steam clouded the air. The smell of smoke, animals, and human life blended into one heavy, living scent. The fire crackled. The wind whispered. And slowly, one by one, the Vikings closed their eyes. Not because they felt safe, but because they had no choice. Sleep was a risk. A gamble. A trust placed in walls, in fire, in family, in the gods. And every night, they took it. They slept while storms tried to tear their roofs away. They slept while ice crept across the door. They slept while the temperature fell low enough to kill a man in minutes. They slept because they had learned how. And that knowledge was not simple. It was layered. Hard-earned. Written in scars, in graves, in the bones of those who failed before them. This story is not about blankets. It is not about buildings. It is about human defiance. Because in the deepest, darkest winter the world has ever known, the Vikings did not freeze. They endured. They adapted. They slept. And as we go deeper into this night, you will discover that what kept them alive was not just fire and fur, but a system of survival so precise, so ruthless, and so intelligent that even modern technology would struggle to match it. Because in the Arctic, the night is not empty. It is watching. And the Vikings learned how to sleep under its gaze. The Arctic night did not forgive mistakes. It did not warn. It did not hesitate. It did not show mercy. One crack in a wall. One weak joint in a roof. One careless opening of a door at the wrong time, and the cold would rush in like an invading army. The Vikings knew this. They had learned it the hard way. Through winters that took children. Through storms that crushed roofs. Through nights when the fire died and did not wake again. So they did not build houses. They built fortresses of warmth. The Viking longhouse was not designed to look strong. It was designed to feel invisible to the cold. Low to the ground. Half buried in earth. Covered in turf that froze solid in winter, turning the roof into a shield of ice and soil. From a distance, it looked like a hill. A mound. A scar in the landscape. The wind passed over it. The storm ignored it. And the cold slid around it. Because the earth itself was part of the structure. Soil is a natural insulator. The deeper you go, the warmer it stays. The Vikings understood this without ever studying science. They watched. They observed. They learned. And they built their homes to sink into the ground like animals burrowing before winter. Inside those walls, the air was different. Outside, breath burned. Inside, breath lived. The walls were layered. Wood frames packed with stone. Stone packed with sod. Sod packed with soil. Each layer slowed the cold. Each layer stole a little more of its strength. By the time the Arctic night reached the inner space, it was tired. Weakened. Almost harmless. And then, it met the fire. The fire was not decoration. It was not comfort. It was life itself. Always burning. Always watched. Always fed. The Vikings placed it in the center of the longhouse for a reason. Heat rises. It spreads. It moves. From the center, it could touch every body, every wall, every corner. It turned the longhouse into a warm cave, a living chamber of breath and light. But the fire did something else. Something more dangerous. Something more important. It dried the air. Cold air carries moisture. Moisture kills. It creeps into clothes, into bedding, into lungs. It turns warmth into weakness. So the Vikings kept their homes dry. They let smoke stain the beams black, sealing them. They let heat harden the walls. They turned their houses into ovens that slowly baked away death. And still, it was not enough. Because even the strongest house can fail if the door betrays you. So the doors were small. Low. Narrow. You had to bend to enter. Not as a sign of respect, but because a small door leaks less heat. The cold hates narrow spaces. It struggles. It slows. It loses its power. When the door closed behind you, the world outside disappeared. No wind. No snow. No howling darkness. Only warmth, smoke, breath, and shadows dancing on walls. The Vikings did not use windows. Glass was rare. Holes in walls were invitations to death. Instead, light came from the fire. Always from the fire. And at night, when darkness ruled everything beyond the walls, the longhouse glowed like a hidden heart beating in the frozen land. But even inside this shelter, sleep was not simple. Because warmth is not permanent. And the Arctic night is patient. As the hours passed, the fire weakened. The embers dimmed. The heat faded. And slowly, silently, the cold began to creep back. This is where the Vikings revealed their greatest secret. They did not rely on one source of warmth. They layered it. Under the sleeping mats, straw. Dry. Packed. Thick. It trapped air, and air trapped heat. Over the straw, animal skins. Heavy. Oiled. Dense. Over that, wool blankets. Then more skins. Then sometimes cloaks. Each layer stealing heat from the body, holding it, refusing to let it escape. It was not comfort. It was engineering. Children were wrapped like treasures. Elders were buried in warmth. The strongest sleepers took the outer edges, where the walls whispered with cold. Bodies formed a barrier. A human shield. A living wall of heat. And they slept close. Closer than modern people could tolerate. Closer than comfort allowed. Because closeness meant survival. One body loses heat. 2 bodies share it. 5 bodies create it. 10 bodies trap it. The Vikings understood thermodynamics without ever naming it. In the dark, they pressed together. Breath warmed breath. Skin warmed skin. The night outside could rage, but inside the warmth fought back. And then there were the animals. Yes, the animals. In the deepest winters, sheep, goats, sometimes even cows were brought inside. Not as guests. As heaters. Their bodies radiated warmth. Their breath added heat to the air. Their presence was not sentimental. It was strategic. The longhouse became a living organism. Humans and animals sharing heat, sharing breath, sharing space in defiance of the cold. The smell was heavy. Thick. Overpowering. Smoke. Wool. Fur. Animal. Human. But smell did not matter. Only warmth mattered. Only survival mattered. And even then, sleep was dangerous. Because the Arctic night did not attack loudly. It attacked quietly. It waited for the fire to dim. It waited for the wind to shift. It waited for exhaustion to take its hold. Then it reached in. Through the floor. Through the walls. Through the roof. Through the breath. And if someone failed to wake, failed to feed the fire, failed to notice the creeping frost, the night took them. This is why someone was always awake. Always. A watcher by the fire. A guardian against the dark. Feeding wood. Stirring embers. Fighting the cold while others surrendered to sleep. The Vikings rotated this duty. No one was spared. Even warriors who faced battle without fear took turns guarding the flame. Because without the fire, the house died. And when the house died, so did everyone inside it. This was not paranoia. This was memory. Every village had stories. Stories of families found frozen. Of children who never woke. Of roofs collapsed under snow. Of doors buried so deep they could not be opened. Of silence where life once breathed. The Arctic night did not need to kill loudly. It killed while you slept. So the Vikings turned sleep into a ritual. A strategy. A system. Every movement mattered. Every placement mattered. Every layer mattered. There was no randomness. No comfort-driven choice. Everything served survival. When they closed their eyes, it was not peace. It was trust. Trust in the walls. Trust in the fire. Trust in each other. Trust that the night would not find them. And sometimes, it did. But most nights, it didn't. And that is the miracle. Because in a world where darkness ruled for months, where the cold could split stone, where the wind could peel skin from bone, the Vikings slept. Not because winter was kind, but because they were prepared. And yet, even all of this was not enough. Because there was something colder than the air. Something more dangerous than the wind. Something that no wall could stop. Hunger. And in the next section, you will discover how the Vikings used food, fat, and even sleep itself as weapons against the freezing night, and why going to bed hungry could mean never waking up. Have you ever tried to sleep while your stomach is empty, and the cold is crawling into your bones? The Vikings would never allow it. Because they knew a truth the Arctic teaches quickly and brutally. A hungry body freezes faster. In the north, food was not pleasure. It was fuel. And before sleep, it became armor. When the longhouse dimmed and the fire softened into glowing red eyes, the last meal of the day was served. Not light. Not delicate. Not small. Heavy stews. Thick broths. Meat soaked in fat. Bread dense as stone. Butter. Lard. Oil. Every bite was designed to burn slowly through the night. Because digestion creates heat. The Vikings did not understand metabolism, but they understood warmth. They had watched bodies grow weak. They had seen men shake. They had buried children who went to bed with empty stomachs. And so they learned. Before sleep, they ate. Not for hunger. For survival. Fat was sacred. Animal fat. Fish oil. Seal blubber. Whale grease. These were treasures. Not because they tasted good, but because they burned long. Slow fire inside the body. Heat that lasted through the darkest hours. A man who ate well could sleep. A man who did not, risked never waking. Children were fed first. Elders next. The strongest last. Because the weakest froze fastest. And winter had no patience for weakness. Inside the longhouse, after the meal, silence would grow. Not empty silence. Heavy silence. The kind that comes when energy fades and the body prepares to surrender. Bellies full. Limbs heavy. Eyes closing. The fire crackling softly like a warning that never stopped. This was the most dangerous moment. Because warmth invites sleep, and sleep invites vulnerability. Outside, the Arctic night pressed closer. And inside, the Vikings lay down. But even food and fire could not protect them from what came next. Because winter did not only freeze the body, it froze the mind. In the far north, sleep is not gentle. It is deep, heavy, pulling, like water that drags you down. The Vikings believed that sleep was close to death, that dreams were doorways, that spirits walked while the body lay still. And in winter, these beliefs felt real. Because people sometimes did not wake. Not from illness. Not from injury. From the cold itself. They called it the long sleep. A person would lie down warm, and be found cold. No struggle. No sound. No warning. The Arctic does not always kill with pain. Sometimes it kills with comfort. A creeping warmth. A soft numbness. A gentle fade. So the Vikings learned to fear too much sleep. They did not let people sleep too long. They shook each other awake. They listened for breathing. They checked faces. A mother would place her hand near her child's mouth to feel warmth. An elder would mutter names into the dark, making sure voices answered back. Because silence was suspicious. And sometimes, silence meant loss. In the longhouse, sleep came in waves. People dozed. Woke. Shifted. Moved closer. Added furs. Fed the fire. Drifted again. No one slept deeply for long. Not in winter. Not when death could arrive quietly. The night outside was endless. Black. Soundless. The sky sometimes shimmered with strange lights that danced like spirits across the darkness. The aurora was not beautiful to them. It was unsettling. A sign that the world beyond was alive and watching. And in that watching dark, sleep became an act of courage. Because every night, the Vikings lay down knowing this. Morning was not guaranteed. Cold does not only attack flesh. It attacks thought. It whispers. It presses. It makes the world smaller. The Vikings understood this, even if they never named it. Winter drove people inward. Into themselves. Into memories. Into fear. That is why stories mattered. At night, before sleep fully took hold, voices would rise. Low. Slow. Calm. Tales of gods. Of giants. Of heroes who survived impossible winters. Of ancestors who walked through storms and returned. These stories were not entertainment. They were mental heat. They kept the mind alive. Because despair is dangerous. A person who loses hope stops moving. A person who stops moving freezes. So they spoke. They remembered. They reminded each other that winter ended. Even when the night lasted forever, it did not last always. Children were told of summer while snow buried the door. Men spoke of green fields while ice crept across the walls. Women described sunlight while darkness ruled outside. They planted images of warmth inside cold minds. Because imagination could hold heat when reality could not. This is how they survived the long night. Not only with fire, but with belief. And then, sometimes, the storm came. Not gently. Not slowly. Suddenly. The wind would rise. The walls would shudder. Snow would slam into the roof like thrown stones. The longhouse would groan as if alive. The fire would flicker. Shadows would leap. Children would stir. And in the darkness, fear would move. This was when sleep ended. Everyone would wake. Because storms in the Arctic were not weather. They were attacks. Roofs could collapse. Doors could bury. Smoke could choke. Fires could die. And if the fire died during a storm, the cold would win. So people moved. Quietly. Quickly. Adding fuel. Reinforcing walls. Blocking cracks with cloth, skins, Anything. Holding the roof from inside if they had to. Yes, holding it. Because sometimes, the only thing between life and death was human hands pressed against wood. And when the storm passed, and the wind fell silent again, they would lie back down. Shaking. Exhausted. Alive. And they would sleep. Because in the Arctic, even after terror, even after fear, sleep was still necessary. Sleep was still risk. Sleep was still survival. And night was still watching. The Vikings did not dress for beauty. They dressed for war. War against the cold. Every thread mattered. Every layer mattered. Every mistake could cost a life. In the Arctic night, clothing was not fashion. It was architecture. Wool was their first shield. Thick. Rough. Heavy. Wool traps air, and trapped air traps heat. Even when damp, wool still warms. This alone saved countless lives. Over wool, they wore furs. Reindeer. Wolf. Bear. Seal. Each chosen for density. Each chosen for the way it held warmth close to the body. But they did something more. They oiled themselves. Animal fat was rubbed into skin. Fish oil into hair. Not for shine. Not for smell. For protection. Oil blocks wind. Oil repels moisture. Oil turns skin into a barrier. The Vikings knew that dry skin survives. Wet skin dies. Before sleep, hands would move over arms, legs, faces. Children would be coated. Elders gently anointed. It was quiet. Intimate. Practical. A ritual without ceremony. Because when the wind found you, oil could save you. Even their hair mattered. Long hair was not just style. It was insulation. Braided, wrapped, tucked. Beards were shields. Scarves were walls. Hoods were caves for the face. When they lay down, they did not undress. They armored themselves. Because the night did not care about comfort. The night cared about weakness. Children should not survive the Arctic night. Their bodies are small. Their heat fades fast. Their strength is limited. And yet, Viking children lived. Because they were never alone. A child was never placed near the wall. Never near the door. Never near the cold. They were always in the center. Always between bodies. Always wrapped. Always guarded. Mothers slept with arms around them. Fathers curled close. Elders whispered names into their ears. Breath warmed breath. Heartbeat warmed heartbeat. Sometimes, when the cold was cruel, children were placed inside cloaks. Yes, inside. Wrapped like cargo. Buried in warmth. Hidden from the night. If a child cried, someone woke. If a child stirred, someone moved. If a child was silent too long, someone checked. Because silence from a child was not peace. It was fear. The Vikings understood something brutal. Winter takes the small first. So they protected them hardest. Even in sleep. Especially in sleep. Section 9, The Deadliest Mistakes. The Arctic forgives nothing. And the Vikings learned this through loss. One mistake, and the night would claim you. Opening the door too long. Letting heat escape. Letting snow blow in. Letting the fire dim too far. Letting exhaustion win. Letting pride replace caution. There were nights when someone thought, just a moment longer, and the fire died. There were nights when someone said, it will be fine, and the roof failed. There were nights when someone lay down hungry, and never woke. And there were mornings, when no one spoke. Because the longhouse was quiet. Too quiet. The Vikings did not speak of these mornings. They did not celebrate them. They did not romanticize them. They buried their dead. They repaired their walls. They fed their fire. And they learned. Every winter added knowledge. Every loss became a rule. Every mistake became law. This is how they survived. Not because they were fearless, but because they remembered. There is always a night that changes everything. One winter. One storm. One silence too long. In a small northern village, in a longhouse buried under snow, a man lay down beside his family. He had eaten. He had worked. He had laughed. He had wrapped himself in furs and closed his eyes. The fire burned low. The wind whispered. The night watched. Sometime before dawn, he stopped breathing. No cry. No struggle. No sound. When morning came, the longhouse stirred. Bodies shifted. Children murmured. The fire was fed. Names were spoken. His did not answer. A hand touched his face. Cold. Not chilled. Cold. The kind of cold that does not leave. The kind that belongs to the night. No one screamed. No one panicked. They covered him. They bowed their heads. They moved on. Because winter did not stop for grief. And the Arctic did not care. He had been strong. He had been prepared. And still, the night had found him. This is the truth the Vikings lived with. You could do everything right, and still lose. And yet, they still slept. Because there was no other choice.